Hello, and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and in this episode, we are going to deal with Thailand, Siam, from 1800 to 1930. Oh, by the way, this is Great Big History Podcast. Thank you for joining us. If you are watching the video, you can see that Siam will survive. Thailand will survive. One of the few countries in the Eastern Hemisphere to not be conquered by the Europeans. But it does get smaller. The Thai Empire in 1600 dominates the Southeast Asian Peninsula, goes down into the Malay Peninsula, goes into Burma, and is bordered on the mountains that separate Vietnam from the rest of the Southeast Asian Peninsula. By 1808, Vietnam has stretched all the way south and has pushed into southeastern Cambodia. By 1887, the French have absorbed Vietnam and have absorbed southeastern Cambodia. By 1914, the French will also absorb Laos and the rest of Cambodia, creating, or parts of Siam as well, creating Indochina, French Indochina, by 1914. But Thailand does survive. So, from the 1700s to around 1880, Siam wins against almost everybody except Vietnam. They take over Laos. They take over Cambodia, the Khmer kingdoms. They take over Laos. Cambodia becomes a province. It becomes part of Thailand. And they pushed Burma out back into Myanmar, back to the east. They took over the Kedah Sultanate in the Malay Peninsula in 1821. They had been trying to take over that and stretch down the Malay Peninsula since the 1200s. So, national project achievement achieved. Bing! Congratulations. They did it. They had set out in the 1200s, and they did it. Now, remember, Thailand is a Buddhist country. A sultanate is Islamic. And so you can see that the different cultures are coming into contact and conflict. But then the British show up in Burma. And suddenly the British taking over India will take over Burma to protect India. And then to protect Burma will push into Thai imperial lands. The French show up in Vietnam, and then they show up in Cambodia, and then they take over Laos. This is in the pretty much 1850s on, definitely the 1880s on. Rama III will build a university at Wat Pho, and it is a giant Buddhist temple. But Rama IV and the Fifth will embrace Westernization. So, unlike the conflicts that we have seen, will they, won't they, will they, won't they, Vietnam, in China, and in Korea, in Thailand, Rama III embraces Eastern learning. He's going to build a giant university. It's going to be a giant Buddhist temple. Rama IV and the Fifth, his successors, will embrace Westernization and speak English. To save Thailand, the decision was to trade with everybody. Yes, there are unequal treaties. Yes, the Europeans show up in there and they are selfish and greedy. But the French are to the east, the British are to the west, and the idea is you can play each other off. And so by making treaties with everybody, no one invades Thailand, and Thailand survives. To Westernize, you need to build lots of infrastructure. And so the Thai kings will bring in Chinese immigration from Ching, China. Now, we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but Ching, in the post-Taiping rebellion period, will embrace emigration, will embrace letting Chinese people go to make money in other places. It was a way through remittances for money, hard money, Western money, to come back to China. So you'll see Chinese laborers in Vietnam, Chinese laborers in Singapore, Chinese laborers in the United States and in Hawaii, in the Western United States, famously building railroads at this period, 1850 to 1900. So the use of Chinese laborers is labor for infrastructure, especially railroads. And those railroads are going to help an export-based economy of raw materials. It's basically going to service the Europeans, the European economies, not Thai economics. So the Europeans get what they want without having to invade. There you go. A series of treaties around 1904 set the modern borders. So Thailand lost territory, but got legal protection that they would exist. And that doesn't really happen anywhere else. There's no place in Africa, maybe Egypt, where the Europeans show up and say, okay, your borders I will respect. There really isn't. They kind of smush people together. They break people apart. You know, the history of India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan is exactly that. Smushing of people together, breaking them apart. People who had been together are no longer together, and people who weren't together are now living in the same country. That's going to cause a problem when we get to decolonization. But for Thailand, it's not. They get a country. They get a legally recognized country by Europeans. That's a big deal. Because there just aren't that many other countries that get that much respect. So let's talk about culture. Since we've now done war and we know what happens, we've done the politics. So Thailand is going to be this combination of Eastern and Western. Because it's not going to give up its traditions. Why would it? It won. Well, it at least survived, which is a victory when the Europeans show up. But at the same time, they do have to modernize. They do have to take on Western ideas because, one, the Westerners will respect that, and two, the Westerners are winning. So there is a desire to be more like them. But Thailand will not give up its kings. They're not going to have a democracy right away. And so we see this combination in the Khon dance. The Khon dance is a war dance of ritualized combat, which is going to become much more important because there's no more. Remember, Thailand is now a place of peace. It's a warrior society. It's a victoriously warrior society. It conquered parts of the Malay Peninsula. It defeated Burma. It fought the Vietnamese to a standstill, at the very least. It dominated the Khmer. Right? So it's a victorious war people with a great history who now, by 1904, have borders that are solidified. They can't go out of them. No one can come into them. So then if you can't war against people, what do you now do? How do you emphasize your warrior tradition without doing war? And the answer was you stylize it and you turn it into culture. And so you get the Khon dance, the ritualized combat, the idea of fighting beasts and demons. You wear elaborate masks. You know, you're taking on evil. This fighting beasts and demons always makes the Thai characters good, right? Without having to rely on an ethnic, racist enemy, right? You go with the demons. You're battling the natural and the supernatural. And you have very stylized dancing. You wear a mask, so everyone is playing a character. And it's to stand in for war and ritualized combat. The other dance is the Rabam. Now this is the dance of men and women. In some ways, it's characterized in the Thai sequence in It's a Small World in Disney World. Obviously, these little puppets can't do all the movements, but that's what the scene is supposed to be about, the Rabam. And it's a dance of men and women. Men and women participating together. So this is a gallant, romantic dance, not a war dance. It's slow, methodical. It uses hands, arms. It's very precise. In fact, you've seen this. Just in me describing it to you, it's the combination of control of one's body, very precise movements, the turning of the hands, the movement of the elbows. These are the kind of things, like, you could see it in your mind. You've seen it in other places. In American culture. And it's a group dance. It's not done alone. It's not done by an individual. It's done in a group, by a group. And it's to show, in a very Buddhist way, control. That's the idea, is to show the Buddhist emphasis on control of oneself, control of one's body. What about Thai music? Well, probably the most famous is the Piphat, the wind and percussion ensemble. Men and women sitting on the ground with traditional instruments. And this is classical music. This is high class, elite classical music. And it's very similar to Indonesian and Cambodian ensembles, especially the use of the what we would call a xylophone. It's not the same, but the idea of the major instrument is not a string instrument like in the West. It's a percussion instrument. And this is classical music, classical culture, and it's elite. It accompanies the war dance, the Khon dance. So it's not folk in a way that the Rambat is. And it's very similar to Indonesian, Cambodian music. This becomes high class culture. Folk culture is the Morlam. This is especially true in Laos, in the Laotian highlands. And it's based on, as all folk stuff is, an unrequited love song. It's the love of two people who can't be together. But as always, as all folk stuff is, has saucy humor in it. It's humor and fart jokes and sex jokes, or at least allusions to those things. But it's about, your main characters are unrequited love. People who cannot be together because of status, of class, of caste, of family, of distance, of war. And it is an important part of festival and folk celebrations. Now we have a picture on the video, but notice girls and boys are both in the ensemble playing the music. It's fiddles, the xylophone, wind instruments. And for Laotians, this takes on the equivalent in America of country music, because Laos doesn't control itself. Whether it's the Vietnamese, the French, or the Thais who control the Laotian highlands, they then control the population, and there's forced population movements as laborers to these different areas. And then when the French come in, there's less forced movement and more industrialized incentives. So the French are going to open up a mine, and they say, hey, we'll pay money, but you have to move to the mine. You have to move to the town we're going to build outside the mine. And so there's a lot in Laotian families of breaking up, of distance, breaking families apart, time and distance. And so what the morlam becomes, M-O-R-L-A-M, what it becomes is country music, is a mourning of, the girl you left behind, your pet, your mom, the town you can't go back to because you've moved on. You're now working for the French, or you're working for the Thais. You're in Bangkok, but you remember back. And so it's romantic. It's nostalgic. And so it's folk. This is not the high class of people in tuxedos going to go see the symphony. No, this is the songs of ordinary people gathered together. And so what we see is this mix of cultures in Thailand, right? We have our warrior culture. We'll go back to our Khan dance, or warrior culture, right? We have the Buddhism and control of the Rabam, right? It's gallant. Now, this is still, the Rabam is personal, but it's not really folk. I shouldn't say that, because it's still elitist, because it's about control. You have to know Buddhism. You have to then practice to have that control, right? You can't be drunk and saucy in the Rabam. It's methodical. It's quiet, even though the dance itself isn't quiet, nor is the music quiet. But the inner piece is quiet, of doing the action. The Rabam is not a mosh pit. The Khan dance can be a mosh pit. Very stylized mosh pit, but a mosh pit nonetheless, right? For the pipat and the music, it's elite music, but it's elite within the entire Southeast Asia. It's similar in Cambodia and in Indonesia. There's a movie about the Indonesian xylophone players, and it's like, the cheerleader movies that we watch, the competition and they're striving to be the best, and it's, you get songs like from Rocky IV by Survivor, and it's, and then there's the competition at the end, and they're all going, and it's sweat is pouring down the hero's face, and he's just trying. And that's Indonesia, and Cambodia has the same. So we see that elite culture has spread, even though it's Buddhist, into places that also have Islam, which is Indonesia, or folk religions. And then we have the morlam, which is the folk music. The people who don't control their own empire. The people who aren't rich. The people who are working for other people. And that's the morlam, the Laotian morlam. So that's where we are, and that's where we'll end. So that's Thailand. We will see Thailand, what happens after the Second World War. But But we have stability. The big thing about Thailand is stability. Westernization, especially for the elites, stability at the borders. It's not a greatness denied, but a greatness satisfied. Stasis. So what becomes the emphasis is culture. Since you can't do politics, you're not going to conquer Burma from the British. You're not going to conquer Cambodia and Laos back from the French. It's not going to happen. So what you have is internal development, which we talked about, Chinese laborers, Westernization, but also an emphasis on culture, on art, on music, on dance. So be careful out there. Take care. See you soon. Stay healthy. Bye.